What's up? All right, let me just refresh this page. Get started here. So let's see. Last time we did a lot of card styling, and I did an animation, a CSS animation in there, and some other stuff. And one thing that happened, I was just going through this right before the stream, is when I was hovering over these cards, they were kind of delayed. And now I'm getting that little delay. So they all push down and then, well, that one stayed up. So there's still some little delay, but for the most part, see like that. For the most part, it is working now, and I can show you what I did. It's kind of a quirk. We still need to figure it out, so I'll probably go a little deeper and figure that out at some point. But like I'm going now, it's working pretty well. And that's just pushing the card up and pushing all the other cards down, and then when you mouse off, they all come up. And what I did there is weird. So it's not even, I don't even know, but I used to have it on mouse over and on these cards, and it wasn't firing at first. So I changed it to mouse enter and it fired. And I like did that for a random reason. I just tried it. So I'm going to investigate more later, but for now, it's closer, and it just had a weird, basically it looked like it was a delay, but what was happening was when you first rolled over this, it wasn't triggering anything. And then after you moved around in there, it would trigger. So I thought it was a delay, but it wasn't. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that, but I think I'll probably go more deeper into that and try to debug it when there's more time. For today, I want to style these. So similar to how I made some states for these cards, like a pushed in and a pulled up state, and I was adding and removing classes. I'm going to do some states for these, which is blank, the hover state when it's not selected, the selected state, and then the hover state when it is selected. So you can see it's like a little different, an X instead of a plus. And basically I'll just make all those states. I'll add an element behind the text that I can change, add and remove classes to it to make the state. And then, you know, based on when you click these or potentially when other stuff happens on the site, we'll trigger these states. And so one example of that would be if the categories are listed down here, I might as well be able to click on them here and then have it, you know, automatically filter on the side. So won't get to that today probably, but it'll be, I'm setting up the foundation to do that. So yeah, I think I'll just start in on there. And what I'd love to do, I don't know if there'll be time. Everything takes a little longer than I think, but I'd love to do these states here and then finish off this menu, because then for the most part, the homepage is like really in play. I'm looking at the live one, but that's okay. You can see what it looks like live. But you can see it's pretty close, but not everything's there. None of these drop downs are here. I would love to just finish off the homepage because I feel like we've been on it so long, and then move on to some of the secondary pages, move on to some of the data, especially like setting up the users and the sign in and all that. So yeah, I feel like this is taking a while, but I do want to square this stuff away to start, because I know that when I create other pages, I'm going to use a lot of the same functionality. So rather than create the page and then build it on both, I want to create this first and just copy it over. But yeah, let's start in. So yeah, we'll skip these. And also last time I mentioned, it wasn't showing these placeholders. So we'll finish these later too, because I don't know why it's actually, I think it's just basically just loading so fast that it's not showing it, but I might even delay it because there is a delay where it's yellow right here. Well, it's pretty small, but there is that delay. So I'll probably do something, and then the categories take a while to load in too. So another thing, we'll put a little message there, and then when the categories do finally load in, we'll just remove the message. It's pretty straightforward. So let's see. So for the categories list, everything that I'm doing is going to be on this single category row page. This element here is a list of rows, and it pulls in these categories, and each category is running off of this page. So each category is like a record you could think of, and each category is going to get its own actions and styles and states and all that because it's this one page. So for me in the studio, all I'm doing is editing this one page, and it'll apply to each of these rows. And so this page now, I do have some styles on there from basically, I mentioned this before, but I'll cover quickly. These are done on, this is the live no code list site. These hovers, and then like all the different states when it's click, not hover, whatever, they're all done with CSS, and it's like kind of like an elegant way to do it. It's with using pseudo selectors, the before and afters in CSS. And it's like, it's cool, and it's like, I thought it was cool when I made it, but really it's kind of limiting. And it's if you're new to CSS especially, you'd look at it and be like, what is this? You know, it's cool that I don't have any extra elements and I'm just doing it all here, but that stuff's pointless. That's like kind of like a show trophy, like a thing you do that you can show to other CSSers, but no one else will care. So I'm not going to do it that way in Builder, because actually it's less versatile. And I did it this way. It's in Ghost, this build, and it was easier for me. But because of the way Builder's set up, and Builder's built to be for web apps, whereas Ghost is built like a publishing platform. It's not really for these like interactive web apps. Since Builder is, I can do it in a Builder native way where I'll just have an element behind here, and I have way more versatility. And then I mentioned last time, but it would be much easier for someone else to come in and either copy what I'm doing or modify what I'm doing, and it would make a lot more sense. So the first step that I'll do, all that is to say, I'm just going to remove some of the extra stuff. Like I saw, it's hover over and it's doing that black there. I'm just going to remove that really quick before I start. And so that's on this category row class. And what I did was I started here with the before and the hover before. So these are the, well, I guess hover is a selector and before is a pseudo selector, I think. But I'm just going to remove those. I don't want those. Let me just make sure. I don't know. I might have had to remove the properties or something. I don't mess with too much with that level of CSS in Builder, because like I said, you don't really have to. It's actually, it's almost better not to in most situations I've found anyway. So I don't really mess with those too much. So hopefully that removed. Yeah, it looks like it did. All right, cool. And then, so now this is just a text box, and it's got a class on it, which has cursor pointer to give it like the hand cursor, because we're going to click on it. It's got padding set to 0. It's got a position relative. It's got width set to fit content, which is kind of a special value for width where it stays block level but fits to its content. And then 0 margin. And so what I need to do, so that's like the default. That's like the no state. That's what you see right here. I need to do the hover state where I get a plus and a lighter highlight behind. And then when you click on it, it's confusing to see. It gets like a darker highlight and then just a different icon. And then when you hover over, it changes to an X. So I basically just have to build all those states. And so I'm going to start by building. How should I start? I'll just put like a container behind here, I think. Or maybe I'll put a container in, but I'm going to make a position absolute. So when I drop a container is like, if you know code, a container is a div. You know, it's like the base level element. When you drop it in Builder right now, it comes with a container class that does some stuff. So when I want a div, when I want just a contain, like an actual container, I drop in the container element, I remove that class. So it's pretty much just an empty element here, and then rename it to whatever I need. In this case, the name, I don't even know what you would call this. It's like a state indicator. And that's like, I think, a weird name, but I'm going to call it that. So the state indicator, we can add some classes. So the first thing I'm going to need is like the default class. And then I'm going to add utility classes probably to change that default. So what I'll do is I'll set primary style class to a default on here, which I'm going to set a few properties to position it, but ultimately it's not going to change it visually. Like I'm going to set it in position. I'm going to set a background color on it like there's going to be, but then I'm going to set it to transparent. So while I'm doing it, I'll put some color on it so we can see what we're doing, but then I'm going to hide it, and then I'm going to change that background color and change that icon using other stuff. So first thing I'll do, I don't know, I really don't like that name and I don't know why, but it's fine. It's indicating the state. So first thing, I'll add this state indicator, and remember, you can see all the properties here. Normally I would be in this used properties and I would just search for properties I know I want and type them. I'll do it this way for now though. Just probably won't keep doing this, but I just want to make sure that people understand you can do it this way. I don't really know where anything is in here, but what I'm looking for is position. Here it is, position. And so the position is CSS, and it's pretty like fundamental, like it's like a core thing that will really help you if you understand it. But everything that you see, everything that's normal that you put on the page and it pushes other elements down, it falls right in line where you put it, all that stuff is either static or relative for a position. So by default, it's actually no position, but if you set it to position relative, or you set anything to position relative, it'll be like the same as it was. You won't visually notice a difference. But other stuff, you do get other benefits. And I mentioned that before, so I won't go into the details there, but sometimes you want to set position, sometimes you purposely don't want to set it. But there's another position property called absolute, and that's what I'm going to use now, which it breaks it from the flow of the other elements. So if you have something and it's position absolute, it's not going to push other elements out of the way. It's could overlap other elements on the page, that kind of thing. And you can explicitly position it with CSS properties and put it where you want. So that's why in this case, I'm going to do position absolute, because I'm going to put, this is going to be this highlight that comes in the back there. So I'm going to use position absolute, set it so it's always behind the text, and set some properties. So this right here is absolute position. So you can see it already got smaller because a div is 100% width normally when it's a normal position, but when it's position absolute, it doesn't have a width. So it squash it down. Unless we set a width on it, then it'll have a width, which I'm about to. And then just to mention, another position, the other important value would be fixed, which is very similar to absolute, but instead of being relative to its parent element like absolute is, position fixed is relative to the screen. So if you had something position fixed and you stuck it in the center of your screen, even when you scrolled, it would stay in the center. Whereas if it was position absolute and you set it in the center of its parent and then you scrolled, it would scroll out of the way. So anyway, I just need position absolute there. And then I'm going to set a width and height of 100%. And the reason, now that I say that might be too big. We'll see what happens there. Oops. So 100 and 100, and then I can set, because it's position absolute, I can move it. I can set it in place. No idea where these positions are in here. Let me just go over here real quick. And so that is, I mean, that's kind of cool to highlight. I set those in the main graphical user interface view, GUI view, but I can switch to this kind of like hybrid view, and the properties I set are still there. I can add one here. I can go back to the other one, etc. And or like I could just go in here and type. Really, what I want to do is type like this, left 0. But I could do it from anywhere, and see it's all updating. So left 0 and top 0. And so that put it behind, or position it where it is. And then there's a background color on here. I'm just going to find the exact color. So that's this LI, and in the inspector, I'm going to force state hover, because that's when that hover comes up. And then I can see, because I did that crazy CSS. So that's a perfect example. Like if you are new to CSS and you inspected this element to try to find the background color, there would be no background color set, and you'd be like, what? So, but it's actually because it's in this pseudo selector here before. So it's just black and a 0.08 opacity. So what I'll do is I'll say RGBA, red, green, blue, alpha, black, which is 000, and then I think I said 0.8. So you can see now it's like that. These are like that. So it's a little off because this is going full width, but that's okay for right now. And so if we look at it here, well, it's going to always have this state on here. So they'll all be selected right now. Whoa. I don't know what that is. That was funny. Let me just clear out something. That doesn't make any sense. Slow. I don't know what's happening there, but I could try to find out. I thought that was just a little glitch. This div here. Huh. Oh, you know, I know exactly what it is. And it's funny because, so I was just talking about how position is important and sometimes you need to like understand what's on it, etc. Or what has a position, etc. This, because I don't have a position around this state indicator I made, it's positioning itself to its closest parent with a position, which happens to be like this whole outer div. So this whole outer div here is, it's saying 100% of that width, 100% of that height, the top of it 0, the left of it 0. And so it's going really big. And I don't know why that alpha value, like why it looks so opaque there, but we can figure that out next. But basically, oh, you know why? It's because there's multiple, there's like 3, or oh, it's like there's tons of categories. There's this many categories and they're all creating that box and they're all putting on top of each other. So anyway, what I need to do is just have a container around this category item. So remember, I've dropped the container, I've removed this. If I put this in here and this in here, I didn't really change anything. All I did was added a container around these 2 elements. So now each one of these lines will have a container around it. But the container, I put a property of position, and in this case, I just do relative, which doesn't change anything visually. But now this state indicator, it positions itself relative to this container because it has a position property instead of positioning itself relative to this whole div. So you can already see it worked, but I'll refresh just to get the real category names in. And this is cool too, because we can move that width fit content property, and then the width of that box will be correct too. All right. So we would take this category row here, and actually maybe I could even put this whole class on the outside. Yep. Cool. So actually what I'm going to do is I had just the text box in here and it had a class that was representing the whole row. I'm going to remove that class from the text box and I'm just going to pop it onto the container because that's really what should have it. And then I don't need this inline property anymore. Whoops. Okay. And so now I can already see that the width is correct. Yep. So we're all good there. So now I have this in place. Oh, actually, that's not correct there. I have this in place and, well, I'll figure out that width in a second. But I don't actually want it to be showing all the time. This state indicator, I'm going to change a bunch. But for now, in the base state, I want the background color to be transparent. So I can set the alpha to 0 instead of 0.8 or 0.08. And now it's transparent. But now I'm going to use other classes to control the rest of this. So we'll add the pluses and the X's and the check in a second. For now, I'll just set everything up. So if we have a utility class, actually, do I want to call it hover? Well, call it hover for now. So I'm going to have a hover. I'm going to have a selected. And then I'm going to have a selected hover. I think I'll do these all separate, just thinking through this as I go, because essentially I could combine utility classes to create stuff, or I could always add remove these so that there's only one of them. And I think just to keep it simpler, like a little more straightforward, I'll just only add remove them. So in that case, I would create a third class state indicator selected hover, I'll call it, when it's selected and hovered. But for now, let's just do the hover. And all we need to do here, so in this one where I have this property set to that, I'll just overwrite it. Whoops, I spelled that wrong. That's if you do work in this view, it'll let you add incorrect properties, so you got to be careful. You got to be careful, but it's something I appreciate because I love the flexibility in case, because you can really think outside the box with code if you want, and so you actually can with Builder too. Like maybe there's a reason I want to add an invalid style property because I'm using it in some JavaScript somewhere else, whatever. So I do love that it lets me do that. All right, so you can see the hover's there, and then it's gone. So what we want to do now is on this page, this whole category row is like a page. We can start to change the individual states, and I'm going to use JavaScript, like I said, instead of the CSS. So when I hover over this entire container, I want to add the class to the state indicator. So what I'll do is I'll say, I'll make an action group, set state hover. And so on mouse over of container, so I go to events, I've got click, mouse enter, and mouse leave. So mouse enter is what I want. Wait, mouse enter. It was mouse over in the other one, wasn't it? That was a confusing thing. I think they both work, but whatever. I can switch it later if it doesn't work. So here I'm going to add set state hover when they mouse enters the category row. And then set state default when the mouse leaves. I'm just gotta click off and click back on so that list refreshes. So hover, I'm just gonna say element add class, and I'm gonna add the class that I just created, which was state indicator hover, and I'm going to add it to the state indicator element. And then to get it to default, I'm going to actually remove that class. And what I'm going to do is as I build this, I'll keep coming back to this action, because set state default, I'm going to remove each of those three classes I made. Even if they're not on there, you know, it won't remove it because it's not there, but I can do that all in set state default so that anywhere I want, I can set state to default. And then probably on set state hover, I'll have to remove the other classes, you know, that kind of thing. But for now, as a test, I'm just going step by step. So in this case, we're going to remove state indicator hover. It's the only one that's possible to have added from state indicator. And so if I test this now, it's not interesting. Let me clear my application data real quick, because I see extra space in there and I feel like it didn't actually take that class. Maybe it did though. Well, the hover is working, as you can see. feel like that's too much space. I don't know what happened there. We'll check on it in a second. Oh, I do know what happened there. Because I removed the class from the text itself, there was something on there that was giving it probably padding and margin. Well, probably just margin is what I need. Margin 0. And I can make that something more accurate later, but yeah. All right. So we got that. And then there's a little plus now. So well, actually, maybe I'll go step by step first. No, I'll add the plus. So in this one, when you hover over, it puts that plus there. And remember, this is because we inspected and forced it. So let me take that off. Has that little plus there. And I also notice it's got rounded edges. Let me just double check. Let's make sure there's nothing else I missed. Border radius 7 pixels. That's good to know. Okay. Yeah, there's a couple things on here I could take. So I'm just going to take these properties and use some of them. It's easier for me just if I just copy those all. And these are like, they apply to all the states. So I can add it to this base state indicator class. I'm going to remove most of these, but I just pasted them like that. So don't need that. Do want that. I don't need content. That's specific when it's a pseudo selector. Height I've got. Left I've got 0, but I'm going to add this in. Probably going to need that in a second. Need that. Got that. Need that. Don't need. Do need that. Keep that. So all this stuff that's on here is like we would have hit it in a second as we were testing through, but I can just leave it on for now. And that. But basically we set that border radius, and then I set, instead of the left being 0, we set the left to negative 1.25, and we set padding left of 0.25. That's going to create a little space for that plus sign. And I'm going to actually change the way it's done because the plus sign is set in a weird way in this case. So I probably won't actually do the same padding, but maybe I will. So we'll see what it looks like. But right now, if I tested this, I think we'll see it should just squirt out here, but not have a plus sign. Oh, wait, maybe I didn't save that. We'll see. It might not. I say it will, but you never know. It's doing nothing. Let's see. Okay, height. I wonder if that width. Oh, I wonder if the Z index is what messed it up. Let me just remove this for now. Originally I had Z index -1. That's like the vertical layering, like it stacks from far away from your face towards your face. So Z index, you can have any number you want. Actually, you can have, you know, Z index of 1 million. Maybe there's a limit, but you can have a lot. Z index -1 was just to make sure it went behind the words. Yeah, it's not even working here. Some property I just added in is making it not work. So let's find out. Not that one. Not that one. Huh. And the reason also, just to mention that the width is now 100% plus 1.75, it has to do with this padding, 0.25, this left, and then a padding on the right side. When you kind of like combine all those numbers together, the width needs to be this. It needs to be a little wider than 100%. And so I use a calc here and just do % plus an M value. I'm just going to add this hover in and see if I can see it. It's really like the hover stopped showing up. Background color. Background. color. Oh, this is opacity 0. My bad. So on hover, I forgot. I just need to make it opacity 1. All right. And then I can remove this because I don't need it to default. And you can see it's already working there, but it's actually not, that left is not working. So let's find out why. Oh, you know why? It's because I was messing with those properties. Let me refresh. There we go. Cool. So you can see it's starting. Now let's add that plus in, which I did it before in the pseudo selector as the content property, which is like an advanced and sort of, it's not a great way to do it when you want to be inclusive to everyone, I feel like, but it's a kind of like a high-end way to do it. I'm going to do it now in a better way where I'm just going to stick a text box into this state indicator. And what I'm going to do is instead of a p tag, which is block level, I'm going to make it a span, which is inline. And then the display text in this case, I'm going to write a plus. And so now I don't know what this is, where it's going to position, but let's check it real quick and let's see what it looks like. I might need to change that text box class too, because I think it's going to be a weird font. Pretty close. Cool. So if I went here, let's see what this has. Nothing. So if I go in here and make it nothing, and all I did was remove the default text box class. I just want to see if it gets a little closer, and then we'll probably just have to shift it over and up or something. Oh man, it's pretty close. So that actually looks great in my opinion. I think I'll do a little more padding on the left, but not change any other properties. So the padding on the left comes from the state indicator. And right now it's 0.25. I'm going to do 0.5 M. Nice. It's actually a little bit too close now. So like I'll probably make it somewhere between 0.25 and 0.5, but that's kind of nitpicky. I mean, I do think those nitpicky details are really important, but for the sake of right now, I'm just going to scoot it left a tiny bit and then move on. So maybe like maybe I'll just do 0.4. All right. And then, all right, so that's good for that. And now when we have default, nothing on it, it's good. The opacity is 0. So that plus is actually still in there, and that background is actually still there, but it's opacity 0. And the background color is transparent too. When I hover, the opacity is 1, the transition makes it fade in, and the plus shows up. Now, when I click on it, I want to set it to a state of selected. So when this is done, when the full site is running, clicking on it's going to also fire an action to filter the cards. But for right now, I don't have that built, so it's just going to fire an action to change the state. So what we'll do is we have set state default, set state hover. Now we'll do set state selected. And set state selected, it's going to add that class for selected. So state indicator selected is going to put it on the state indicator. But it's also going to remove any other potential states that are on there. So it's going to remove hover. And technically, I know there's another one, so I'm just going to start doing this. I didn't get to that other one yet, but I know it's going to also need to remove selected hover. And the reason is because there's 3 here, right? So each one of these actions, I'm going to need to address all 3, where I add one and remove the other 2. So I'm going to go back to the other action and update that too. I don't necessarily need to do that because each of these utility classes could potentially overwrite. Like I could just add it because maybe it overwrites maybe selected overwrites hover. But to be sure, I'm just going to remove the other ones. It's so simple. Why not, you know? So that's all I need for set state selected. And then like I was talking about, I can update hover by saying we'll add the hover class, but you never know what else was on it. So we'll remove those other two. So we'll remove selected and then duplicate this and remove, whoops, selected hover. And then the default state, we're just removing all three. So this one would remove selected, and then this one remove selected hover. So that's kind of housekeeping, but those are all set up now. And now that I have set state selected, I'll do that on click. So on this container, we have under events, we have mouse enter, it's setting the state hover. But on click, it's going to set the state selected. And now what's going to happen right now is it's going to set the state selected when we click, but as soon as we mouse leave, it's going to actually remove that selected state. So we'll need to account for that in a second. But first, let's make sure that it's when you click on it, it's setting the correct state. And actually, I don't know if I changed any properties in there. I just realized we probably won't even see it. Well, it removed the background, so I know it worked. So let's go to this state indicator. And now just to see this, we're going to temporarily add the selected class. So it has no properties on it. So what happened was we hovered over, it added the hover class. When I clicked it, it did work because it removed the hover class, but it added this class that has nothing on it. So what I actually need to do is figure out the background opacity here. So it looks like it gets on the original site, it gets a class active when it's clicked. And the background is under this before, and it's so it's double, it's 0.16, double as opaque. So that would be background color of RGBA 000.16 and an opacity of 1 because the default has the opacity of 0. So we're going to hover. It's going to show the lighter version. Oh, I forgot to remove that. That was just because I left it on there. So we remove it. Sorry for all this refreshing. That was unnecessary. I just did that. And then, okay, the hovers are working. When I click, it highlights it. Now, like I said, when I hover off, it's going to remove it, but I can see it got darker. And then in this case, I'm not setting that plus sign with CSS like I was before. Now that plus sign is right here. So I can actually do that in the selected state. I can set a value, element set value. I choose the element, which is here. And then instead of plus as the value, I set this check mark, which I believe maybe it's that. And now this will work, but it won't set it back to the plus. So I'll do that in a second, but let's double check this works. All right, gave it a question mark. That's weird. Did I just refresh? And I actually hate that check mark, to be honest. Well, I shouldn't say hate. It's not my favorite check mark, so I might not even use it. So if this still gives me a question mark, yeah, I don't know why it's doing that, but I'll just use something else probably. And then like, I didn't name these, but it's good to. So this would be like add class selected, remove class hover, remove class hover selected. And the reason I do that is because now, you know, if it's down the road and I want to come edit in here, I can read these names and know exactly what's going on. Like I know this is adding a style class selected, removing style class hover, setting a value for the check mark, that kind of thing. So it's just good practice. But yeah, so now that there is a check mark on here, it like stays a check mark. You know, once I click it, no, that one will always be a check mark. So I do need to set it back when it goes to hover or default, we're going to set it. So right now I'm just going to set it as default to that plus. So we set the plus to a value of plus. It's called plus. And then, like I was just saying, just name these really quickly. And it just takes a second to name them. So it's like when you think about it, just enter those names because you'll appreciate it in the future. So now plus, select it, but it's back to a plus. All right, and then there's now, so okay, so now the last state we need to do is like, basically if it's selected and then you hover over it, we need to show a minus sign. So it's that selected hover state, but this adds another level of complexity into this little thing we're doing. So instead of saying on hover, add class hover, we actually want to do on hover, check if it already is the state hovered. And if it is, show a different state, show like the minus sign. If it's not already the state hover, show what we're doing now, the normal hover, which is a plus sign. So a little tricky, a little confusing as we get into these like deeper in, but really it's kind of still straightforward. It's just adding a conditional, an if statement into these classes we're doing. And so before I dive right in and set that up, it'll be simple to set up. The one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a variable into this whole equation called state. Basically, this page and each of these pages individually gets their own. I'll have a variable that always tells me the state. The reason is instead of, when I hover over, instead of checking if it has a class or not, I just check the state variable. And that way in the future, I know anything with that state variable I can use. Like, so I know I'm going to have to use that later when I filter. I'm going to look for all the categories that have the state selected. So I know I'm going to use it later anyway. So it's really easy to set a variable. You can do this in a lot of ways, and you can actually initiate it from wherever you want. I'm just going to do something where on page load, I set a variable for the state and just call it like, you know, default or something. So this is like the state variable. Target page is current page. So each one will be its current page. The name is state. And so like you could do this in code. A lot of times you would do this with like IDs or numbers, or you would set, you know, there's different things you can do. In Builder, because it's so easy to update things and switch things, I don't necessarily need to like create a system where 1 is default, 2 is hover. You know, the reason you would do that is because then later those 1s and 2s, you can change them to other things. You know, they're just references. Builder is like that part of it's built in. So I'm, instead of being like opaque on this, instead of like adding a layer of translation, I'm just going to be direct. I'm going to say state equals default and just give it that value. And so that way it'll be really easy for me at any time to check what that is. The one drawback would be if I'm doing a check somewhere else in the future and I say if state equals default, then when I came in here, if I change this to something else, I'd have to change it everywhere. So there is a small drawback, but it's totally fine in this case. I'll probably never change these. So state is default on page load by definition. I'll even write that. So now when we set the state hover, we can also update that variable. And we don't have to, it's already declared, we don't have to do anything special. We just use the same name and replace the value, right? Write it like that this time. And then for selected, jeez Louise. Selected. And so what that allows us to do, that won't output anything. It doesn't show anything different to the user, but that will keep a track, keep an active state that we can reference or ask for at any time for each category. So in this case, and it's already set because when I set the state in the action, I'm setting that variable. So in this case, now I'm ready to put a conditional statement, if statement. So when you hover, it checks first if it's selected or not. And then depending on if it's selected or not, it'll set the state to either hover or selected hover. So the first thing I'll do, so right now I have this so that on the mouse enter, it's setting the state hover. I'm going to change that. I'm going to make a new action group. That's a condition. And on one condition, it'll run state, this one, set state hover. But on another condition, it'll set state selected hover. So it's going to be a condition. It's basically like is hovered, right? Or no, is selected is what I want to know. Now let me think, because actually there's probably going to be multiple times I'm going to need an is selected condition. Really, I want to know it's for hover. So let's say condition hover is selected. Or even what I can do to be more explicit is I'll just set this like this. Set state hover is selected, because I'm trying to set, or actually like that would be perfect. So what I'm doing is I'm setting state. So even alphabetically, I want this action to be listed with the other ones that are related. But while I'm setting state, I'm checking is selected. Is it selected? So this action is going to run a condition. So we have these a couple conditions. I think I went over this in a different one. But I need this compare values. I'm just going to compare two values. I'm going to say the first value I'm going to compare, I'm going to say the variable current page state. If it equals default, then set state hover. Basically, that's like what we had, because we were assuming it equals default. We were saying on mouse enter, set state hover. And then if it's not, if it's not default, if it has some other state, which would be selected, then we're going to set state selected hover, which I didn't make yet, but it would be set state selected hover. And this is very similar to the other ones, but we're just adding the selected hover class to state indicator and then removing the other ones. Just duplicate. And in this case, to be quick, I'm not going to name these other two, even though I should, but I'll know they're the other ones. And then selected hover has the minus sign, so or the X. So if it's selected and then you hover, it gets an X. So we'll do set value of the plus, and this X, you can just type X like that, but this X that I have in there is actually an HTML entity of like a times. So it's a more symmetrical X. So that's actually how I'll write it. And okay, and then so on this condition now I can finish it off. I can say if the state is default, set state hover, but if the state's not default, set state selected hover. And then I'm just going to change that a little. I'm going to do the reverse. It's almost arbitrary, but I feel like it's a little smarter. Instead of saying if it's default, do something, I'm going to say actually if the state is selected, then do selected hover, and if not, do regular hover. That way, whether it's default, whether it's already hovered, it can be any state. It's not selected, then we'll do the regular hover. That was like, I didn't need to do that, but I feel like that's a little more logical. All right, and then the last step is just instead of mouse enter calling set state hover, we want mouse enter to call is selected. So now it's going to check if it's selected and then either add the hover we had or add the other one. And I think before we look at it, let's just make sure that class is filled out. I don't think it is. Yeah, it's got nothing on it. Oops. So the things that we need on here, if you forgot and you were building this, you just look it up really quickly, but I remember it's that and opacity 1. And actually, now what's cool is like now that I'm doing this, I realized that this, well, yeah, I'll explain this, but then I'll show you and come back. This class is actually the exact same class as the regular hover. So I can even make this a little easier on myself. But for now, let's test this because I think this will generally work. Oh, I gotta remove that class. All right. So now if I hover over, it gets the plus. If I select it, it gets the check. Oh, it works now. And then, oh, how am I gonna do this? It's gonna lose its state when I leave it, isn't it? To test this, I'm just gonna temporarily remove something. So when it mouse leaves, it sets state to default no matter what. I'll just take that off for now. We actually have to put our own condition there because depending on, you know, it's gonna be the same thing. We'll create another condition. So oh yeah, it's not removing them now. So I select it there. Now when I hover, in theory, it should show the X instead of the plus. Yes. All right. Cool. So that's all generally working. And I like that thing I mentioned. I'm not gonna actually, I looked at the time and this is almost an hour. So I'm just gonna finish up the last part instead of fixing that. But basically what I mentioned was that since this class and this class, they're the same. Background color and opacity. Background, oh, actually that's a little different. So yeah, so no, I do need to keep them separate. So ignore all that. Proceed as is. But yeah, basically what I was going to do is I was going to use that same class and then I'm setting the value of the element to change that plus or X or check, but it actually is a different opacity, which I didn't realize. So we're all good. I have a class for everything. I have a state for everything. The last thing I'll do, and then I think we're done with that, is on mouse out, whoops, on mouse leave, I need to do another conditional. And I think it's the same thing. It's is it select or not? Because if it's selected and you leave, we'll set the state to selected instead of selected hover. If it's not selected and you leave, we're setting the state to default. We're removing all the classes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this. Well, I almost had this before, but hover is selected. And then state or set state. It's really leave, but I'll call it unhover just to be like really explicit in my naming, and no one sees this but me, so no big deal. Is selected. And so this is kind of a mirror of this other one. So, whoops. So if I came to this other one, I can just copy this action and then paste it. And so I'll have if current page state equals selected. So now this is on mouse leave. So if it's selected and you leave, instead of setting the state to selected hover, I want to set it to selected. If it's not selected and you leave, I want to set the state to default. So because I've already set all these classes up one time, and now like as I proceed, I just get to use them. So that's kind of another cool thing just about how builders set up. And I mean, that's how it would work if you are really experienced in coding, because you try to repeat yourself as little as possible, but it's actually hard. You have to be really good to set that up in code, whereas in Builder, it's just built in. So I think now I just need to put this actual action here. So this unhover is selected. And now I think everything's going to be working, and then it'll be an hour and we can call it a day. So that didn't work. Why? Unhover is selected. Unhover is selected if current page state equals selected. set state selected if not set state default. I feel like I'm just gonna feel like that's like a cache thing or something because that looked correct. Unless default class maybe didn't remove something it should. Come on. All right, yeah. All right, so I just needed a clear cache. So these are good. If I select it, it's good. And now when I roll off, it should stay selected. All right. Multiples. When I roll over, the hover doesn't work. When it is selected, oh, there it goes. That was weird. But that works. And then one thing I forgot is now if I click it again, it needs to remove that state. So it's the same thing. It's another conditional. I'm going to finish it now. I got 4 minutes on the hour, but it'll go a little over, I guess. But basically, I'm just going to convert that click. I have set state selected to a condition again. So basically, when you hover over this row, when you leave this row, when you click on this row, every time it's running a condition, wondering if it's selected, doing something based on whether it is or not. So I'll set up a new action really quick here, set state, and this would be like click is selected. And then in here, I have that action already ready, so I just pasted it. But you can always copy, paste, duplicate out of this 3-dot menu. So compare values, I check the state now, and this is for the click. So if it is selected, and then you click it, I want to set the state to default. If it's not selected already and you click it, I want to set the state to selected. And again, perfect example, all that stuff's already built, all those actions, so I just select them and it should be good to go. Oh, and then this, instead of on click running selected directly, I do click is selected. And now I think I'll be done with this. Click, stay selected, got the X, click it again. All right. Now, one thing I noticed is that worked. When I hovered off, it popped it back to selected. And I think that's because I forgot to remove that state. I forgot to change the state on one of them. So if I go to set state hover, adding the class, removing the other two classes, and then setting that variable here. So I can copy this, but I'm guessing that on default, I'm not setting the variable. I'm setting the value for plus, but I'm not setting that variable. So that was default. And then I'll just make sure, whoops, on these other two that I am setting a variable. Oh, I guess hover doesn't need a variable, right? Selected needs one and it's got one. Set variable state. I set a variable here for hover, but I actually don't need a hover variable. But that's okay. Right? Yeah, I don't need that. It's really just the state is either default or selected. So, and when I'm checking, I'm only checking for selected. So really that default value can be anything. It can just be nothing if I want. So I have it set to default, and I have it when it switches back to the default state, it sets it to default again, but could be anything. Really, in this case, I didn't actually think there was only going to be an on-off state, selected or not selected. But in this case, you could actually do like a 1 and 0, on-off, true, false. That'd be fine too. I was imagining I was going to have like, 4 to 6 states for some reason, but there's really not. All right, so now that I set that variable, everything will work. I love saying that before I try it because it never does. All right, so yeah, so it looks like it's all working. Nice. And it's all similar to this one. Let's just zoom in a little. Nice. So there's a few styling things, but it looks pretty much the same. And think we're all good there. So, all right, cool. So that took an entire hour just to do that, which is funny. I thought I'd get to more, but it looks like since that's good, all we have is this menu, this search bar, and the footer, which are all relatively quick. The menu has drop down, so maybe that'll take longer. Like I say, everything takes longer than I thought. But just have those for the homepage, and then we can move on to some of the juicier stuff, which is clicking these to filter the list. That's going to be pretty tricky. I mean, not tricky, but pretty complex. And then doing the individual pages has like a whole other set of stuff. So when you click on one of these cards, it's going to take you to the individual page. We're going to have to search for that directly and then do stuff based on whether the user is signed in or not. So we'll do all the user sign in, and that's where you can upvote it or endorse it. So there's a lot to do on those pages. But the homepage itself, and kind of like I would call this setting up the base of the site, is getting there, just about done. It took way longer than I thought, but that's okay. It's getting there, and I'm explaining other stuff in the process. So I'm already too far along on Twitch. You can't see the original videos, but I set up a site for this, which is, I don't think you can see my URL, but it's no-code-list-rebuild.builder.com. And I just put in all of the old videos here. So it's most recent at top, but it goes all the way down to the first one. So I shared that link on Twitter this morning. I'm sure I'll share it again. But if you want to catch all the old ones now, since they're not on Twitch, you can head to this site. And what I'll do is for next time, I'll change this banner at the top. There's like that black banner up there that says sign up for early access. It's covering my URL bar. I'll change that to have a link to this so you can see all the old videos. But when I'm done today, I'll pop this one up, and in the future, I'll pop them all up. So thanks for watching. Next time will be Monday. And yeah, see you then. Thanks.